And we are live with Dan Weisberg, CEO of the New Teacher Project out of New York, TNTP, as most people would know it. Good morning, Dan. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. It's an honor to be here.
Well, I don't know if it's an honor, but it's my honor, if it is one, to have you on. This show has been fantastic for me to be able to speak with people that I know and respect and like from a distance anyways, and have a chance to talk to, but never have a good excuse just to have just a conversation. Like, let's not have it be about a meeting in some hotel somewhere with some questionable food and even more questionable keynote speakers, but let's just talk, man.
Yeah.
You wrote a blog post recently that leaves me a little bit of leaves me with some heartburn, just a little bit, and I don't know if I know enough to have enough heartburn. But in your blog post regarding the COVID era impact upon teacher licensure and teacher testing, recruiting, pipeline building, all the things that we knew before COVID that were a little bit fragile about recruiting teachers, getting them into the workforce, and making sure that we had a healthy pipeline have only become more of an issue. But the piece that you wrote was really about, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe rethinking the way that we are going to do the testing part of teachers to help them get into the field. So tell me more about what the aim of your blog post was. Like, what's your idea? What's the idea in there?
Yeah, I mean, it starts with what I think, and not just I think, lots of people think is a terrible problem right now. We've got a pretty homogeneous teacher workforce that is 80% white, that is serving a majority of kids who are kids of color in our country. And to put a finer point on it, I mean, this is not a theoretical issue. It's not oh gosh, let's wring our hands. Let's all good, white liberals wring our hands, but then move on to something that seems more urgent. Ed Trust New York did a great study on this, Chris. It found that there's 115,000 Black and Latinx students just in New York State who are in schools without a single Black or Latinx teacher, not one. By the way, 550,000 white kids in New York who are at schools without a single Black or Latinx teacher. Almost 1 million white kids in schools in New York State without a principal of color. And the effects of that on kids, I mean, hopefully, everybody across the spectrum will agree with this, are profound. We've got a pretty recent study that found that, particularly for economically disadvantaged young Black boys, if they have even one Black teacher in 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade, we see significantly lower, like 40% lower dropout rates in high school later on. That's one teacher of the same race in elementary school has that profound effect later on. In our study, in the opportunity myth, what we found is that teachers of color have much higher expectations, or much more likely to have high expectations for kids of color than white teachers. And those high expectations show up in academic gains, in months and months of academic gains, particularly for kids of color who start the year behind. So this is a crisis, is that teachers of color have much higher.
You say that the teachers of color have higher expectations. We know for a fact that they make an impact on student learning, especially with kids that are same race matched, meaning if you have Black or brown kids in a classroom, they have a Black or brown teacher. I think Fordham found that it was race matched. It's not just a teacher of color, but same race teachers. But the point that I want to get to is, though, when we talk about how we get those teachers of color into the field, we are often having a conversation, which I'm sure you're going to disagree with this. We're often having a conversation about how we lower the bar to get more of them in.
Totally.
And I think that
Oh,
is what's dangerous to me. I mean, in my state that I live in, we're doing two things at once. The local advocates here around teacher licensure in Minnesota would tell you we're making it harder for high quality, experienced teachers of color that move from other states here to actually get into the classroom, while at the same time lowering the bar on the test, the basic skills test that you have to pass to become a teacher, so that we get more teachers of color in. So we're doing two things at once. We're keeping high quality, experienced veteran teachers of color out of the classroom on one end of our system. And then we're allowing the door just to open for people who can't pass a basic skills test on the other end in the name of diversity. Both of those things to me seem wrong.
Yeah. So 100%. This is, I mean, look, this is one of the pernicious things. I mean, this is frankly a racist way to look at the problem, where the first thing out of a lot of, white people's mouths when you start talking about diversity is lowering standards. And that, that's problematic on a number of levels. But what we're talking about is actually raising standards, but raising standards about the stuff that matters. I mean, what do we actually care about when we're talking about teachers? Hopefully what we care about is this person going to promote learning and growth of his or her students, period. Like, we want to know if my kid is in this teacher's third grade class, is my kid going to feel safe and affirmed? And is my kid going to learn all the stuff he needs to learn for third grade? Like, that's ultimately what we care about. This is what we do now, Chris. We come up with a bunch of really weak proxies for whether that teacher is going to be effective at helping kids to learn and grow, that end up creating artificial barriers to entry that disproportionately affect people of color. What am I talking about? Right now, the way we do teacher certification, the size of your checking account is more important than your ability to help kids learn, because you're going to have to pay a ton of money for coursework where there's no evidence that coursework makes you a better teacher. And you're going to have to spend a significant amount of money on testing that also is a really weak predictor of whether you're going to be any good in the classroom and helping kids learn. So what are we talking about? Yeah, it is problematic to say we're just going to get rid of these certification exams and just let anybody in. No, we should have a really high bar. Here's what I'm talking about. Nothing predicts your future ability to help kids learn than your current ability to help kids learn as a teacher. That's the best predictor we have. How are your kids doing right now? If you tell me that, I'm going to tell you probably how your kids are going to be doing in 2021, 2022. We have all teachers, every single teacher who becomes a certified teacher in our country spends time in the classroom before they get certified, right? So they spend time in the classroom as a student teacher. They spend time, if they go through one of our programs, they spend time doing intensive work in summer school before they become a teacher of record. A lot of teachers are provisionally certified their first year, so they're not fully certified, and they're in front of kids. What we're talking about is start to measure how these teachers do before they become certified with kids. And the ones who are doing a good job helping kids to learn, those are the ones you want to keep. The ones who are doing a poor job helping kids learn, those are the ones you don't want to keep. And that would not be about the size of your checking account. That would not be about seat time and coursework. That would not be about sitting down and taking a Praxis, which is a weak predictor of how you do. That would really be a test of how good you are actually as a teacher, which is what we should care about. And here's the thing, last thing on this, and then I'll stop talking. You probably would think, I might have thought that, if you look at college graduates, young college graduates of color, they're probably going into teaching at higher rates than white college graduates of color. Not true. Not true. Like what you'll hear, Chris, a lot of times from ed schools is, well, we'd be more diverse, but there just aren't enough qualified, young people of color out there to get into our programs. Not true. The percentage of white college graduates with a teaching degree is about twice the percentage of black college graduates. who have a teaching degree. So we do a terrible job recruiting young people of color into the profession, and it's part because we make you run through a lot of expensive hoops that don't actually matter to whether you're a good teacher or not.
I mean, which though, so why shouldn't a teacher just be able to pass these basic skills tests? Even if the tests aren't great predictors of something, why not?
Yeah, I get it, like intuitively, and I don't know, I don't know what it is. We have plenty of teachers in our programs, and we're rigorous. Like, there's a lot of people who don't make it through our programs. It's not like you pay the tuition to our programs and you pass automatically. There's maybe 10, 15% of people who don't make it because they just don't demonstrate that kids learn. So frustrating for us, it doesn't really answer your question, but we'll see a teacher we know is really good, has passed our screens. The kids are learning in her classroom, and she's 8 points short on the math Praxis.
Okay, so let's
stop
there.
Taking it 3 times. I don't know why.
I was about to say, you have to answer that question. Why is she 8 points short on an objective measure that we would hope that she could pass?
Yeah.
I mean, we have to answer the question why those things happen. We can't, in my mind, we can't just say, well, let's move on from that and find another measure of which she will do well on so that she can sit. Like, listen, as a parent, I want teachers of color in my classrooms. I want teachers in my classrooms who, whatever color they're going to be, mastered something within the field that they want to teach in. First of all, I mean, a lot of states don't even require you to be a master within the field of, within the subject area of what you want to teach, for instance. And I get it, man. I don't, you can probably help me with the stats are about the number of teachers that do not pass on the first time, second time, or whatever. I do know for teachers of color, it takes more tries oftentimes, and those tries aren't inexpensive. So it does cost you money, which I think that's a different problem. Like how much these things cost and who pays for them. And even the things like, to become a teacher, you have to pay for your own student teaching and stuff like that. Right. That's a problem with the economics of teaching induction, right? Which is silly. But on the part of passing, it seems like we're not actually drawing the higher end of people within the collegiate pool to teaching in the first place, which is its own problem. Because there very clearly are people of color who could pass those tests no problem. And we often see it when people come from other fields into teaching, have much higher pass rates than the people who go through a poor high school situation and then into a poor college situation and then to a low-rated college of education system and then take a test. And then we blame the test. We don't blame the fact that they had crappy colleges of education, crappy prep, crappy high school, crappy K-12 experiences, and probably couldn't get into engineering or med school or something rigorous because, of course, people of color who can do that first. Help me not be so kind of, cynical about this, but then we blame the test as kind of the central point of, and I don't think you're doing it. I think you're saying whether we love or hate the test, it doesn't predict whether or not you're going to be good with kids in the classroom, which seems to be a science point up against what feels like a common sense point.
Right.
Yeah, that seems like to be the battle here.
Yeah, no, and I get the common sense. And look, I'm not against testing as a concept. I mean, if the research came back, if Dan Goldhaber at University of Washington, research showed that the results on Praxis were a powerful predictor of your effectiveness as a teacher, then we're having a different conversation. But they don't. They show they're a really weak predictor. And so there's two problems with it. I got to be honest, Chris, like I can't answer the question. Why is it that we see these disparities in the pass rates for candidates of color versus white candidates on a Praxis? All I could do is speculate. I don't know that anybody's ever isolated that. What I can say is that if you use Praxis as your main gate for whether you become a teacher, two things will happen. There will be some really effective teachers, disproportionately teachers of color, who will be kept out, and there'll be lots and lots of ineffective teachers who will get that stamp of approval and will be let in. So I just want to find something that, it's kind of like, you know how the NFL gives all their, I guess all their draft candidates, the Wonderlic test or some kind of intelligence test, and it's like they publish those now and then. You find out, oh, Russell Wilson is like, was
High up.
one of the top, was high up, or whoever, Brett Favre was in the middle, which is kind of cool. It would be crazy to say that's how we're going to determine who gets to play in the NFL. Like ultimately, we need to see these dudes out on the field under pressure and see how they perform. Like even what they do in college is not the greatest predictor, and that's what we're doing right now. We're keeping talent out based on, some test, as opposed to seeing how they perform on the field.
And you're basically saying in this case, counterintuitive to what you might think, passing the test actually could bar some people who, if you looked at them in other ways, would be great in the classroom, would be great with kids, and their kids would do better.
Right.
And when we say do better, their kids would do better. Like, what's the measurement of how we know that they're actually good teachers?
Well, there's a really,
I mean, I got to know this.
Yeah. I mean, look, partly based on test scores for sure. Like there should be objective measures. So when we look at effectiveness of the teachers we're preparing, when we have test scores, we look at those test scores. Our kids growing academically based on test scores in their classrooms. But we also look at student surveys. We also look at observations, and not just observations by anybody, but observations by our people who are trained and normed. And not everybody gets a passing grade. So you want to look at multiple measures, but ultimately, it's going to be about you want to have evidence that kids in this classroom are achieving at high levels. And regardless of where they start, that's the thing. That's the beauty of great teachers. They take kids who the system says aren't going to make it, and guess what? They end up achieving at high levels.
So you've heard me before kind of bring up this point, which is it drives some of my section or my side of the questions that I'm asking you. New Orleans is a great example of prior to Katrina, there was a long-term problem in the teaching corps and in the education of New Orleans public schools that most of the country ignored and didn't pay attention to. It was one of the most corrupt districts in the country and had some of the lowest possible standards and lots of cheating in the testing, lots of kind of paternalism in the hiring practices and, blah, blah, blah of teachers. So Katrina happens, it kind of wipes the slate clean in a lot of ways. And many of the teachers that had previously taught in the system come back to apply for their jobs again. And we talk often about, oh my God, we fired 7,000 teachers. Well, first of all, we didn't, because it wasn't 7,000 teachers. That included everybody, including janitors. Two, we didn't fire them like we didn't fire them. The school board couldn't pay them anymore because they had no schools. So let's just be clear about what happened there. But when it was time to have teachers come back in, very few people know this. The majority of the teachers that were hired in the system were actually veterans from the old system, but it wasn't everybody. 2/3 of the teachers, I want to say it was 2/3. Now I'm going to forget, but maybe it was 1/3 or 2/3 of the teachers couldn't pass a basic skills test when they came back. These were teachers that had been teaching in the previous system for years. Veteran teachers, experience, who thought they were fantastic and amazing, couldn't pass basic skills tests. As somebody who knows a little bit about New Orleans and their public schools prior to Katrina, that to me felt like a blow to me that we had been lied to for years. We'd been lied to for decades. The people that we thought were kind of the more well-to-do college-educated people in our midst, actually, by national standards, were not very good. And I shouldn't say very good, but they just weren't very prepared in ways that if they hadn't been tested when they came back, we would have went another 5 decades without even knowing the fact that a good part of our pool. So I'm erring on the other side of like, okay, yeah, the test might keep some people out in the beginning, but not abiding by what the tests tell you lets too many people in some cases. And they were all of color. This wasn't like a large white teacher
Right,
pool,
right.
in New Orleans.
Right. I totally get the feeling of betrayal, and I think that was real and justified. I mean, obviously, the kids weren't being served very well, but that the responsibility lay somewhere for that. I mean, it didn't lay with the kids, so it lay with the adults somewhere, and no doubt there wasn't enough rigor in thinking about who's going to teach and who's going to continue to teach our kids. What I would say probably the real view is some of those folks who couldn't pass the basic skills test really shouldn't have been in front of kids. And maybe most of the ones, it's possible, most of the ones, Chris, who couldn't pass the basic skills test shouldn't have been in front of the kids. Some of them were probably really effective at having kids learn. So, and by the way, let's always flip the equation. The ones who did pass the basic skills test, there were some great teachers, no question, in that group. And there were some people who shouldn't have been in front of kids in that group. We just got to find a better way to, screen people who would get a really crucial job. And so I totally hear you on the New Orleans story. And I know enough native New Orleanians to know that that's a tale that is continued to be, talked about and is an important kind of event. Particularly for Black New Orleanians. So I'm not going to claim I know better than you all who grew up there, but I think we would have been better served had we been able to say, all right, look, we need thousands of teachers. Let's give you a chance to get in front of kids. Let's have a really rigorous measure for how your kids do, and let's retain the teachers whose kids are flourishing, and let's not retain the teachers who maybe get a perfect score on tests whose kids are not flourishing.
Yeah. And to be clear for anybody listening, you are not saying that that just point blank, the test is the problem or testing is the problem.
No.
But you are saying that alternative means of determining whether or not a teacher will be good or not can be more powerful and more predictive of how well they do. So what's an alternative way of knowing how well they're going to do?
Alternative way is when you are student teaching, you are responsible for a group of kids. That could be a full class for a period of the year, or a couple of lesson units. It could be part of the class, so a small group who you're working with, and you're getting training on all the elements of instruction, and being observed and being given feedback. And we're going to examine over the course of the year that you are student teaching or the semester, how your kids are progressing. Are they learning what they are responsible for learning? Are they connecting? Are they engaged? Do they feel that the student teacher believes in them? And we're going to look at that through an examination of how their work, the student work. If we are given assessments, we're going to look at their assessments, and that's going to be the bar. So if your kids are learning math, if you're assigned to teach 10 third graders math over the course of the full year or half the year, we're going to take a look at whether your kids are learning math. Have they mastered the concepts that you were teaching them during that time? And that's going to determine whether you get certified or not. Now, is it going to determine forever and always whether you get certified if you don't make it? I'm not saying that. Maybe you get a chance to come back and do some more student teaching or be an intern in some way and do it again. But we're not going to let you in if your kids are not learning. And there could be a lot of reasons why your kids are not learning, by the way, just to be clear. Maybe your kids are not learning math because you don't know the math very well and you're not confident in it, right? So that could be some of the people who are screened out by the math praxis. Could be that you're not connecting to the kids and you don't ultimately care that much about them. You don't like being in front of them, and the kids sense that, and so they're not learning in front of you. Could be that you've got all the passion and you love the kids, but you just don't communicate very well. There's a million reasons why you might not pass it, but at the end of the day, we're less worried about the why and we're much more worried about the what. Do your kids learn or not? That's how I would do it. And I think we spend, here's the other thing, like here's the more radical thing, frankly, than Praxis. It's the coursework. New York State, you got to get a master's degree. You got to get and sit and take coursework and pay for a master's degree to become a teacher. Like that's a huge barrier. And this is the crazy thing. Like we just go on as if, oh, there must be there's no evidence in the research that has value, that taking those courses actually makes you a better teacher. But getting that master's degree, that's a huge, huge barrier to entry. So rather than spending, the billions of dollars and, God knows, untold hundreds of thousands of hours on that, I'm not saying there's no value to coursework generally. I'm just saying we are spending a lot of resources on teacher preparation. It's not very effective along a number of dimensions. If we divert some of those resources to assessing how people do as student teachers, we're going to have a lot better system and a lot more diverse teachers.
That kind of opens up what I think is a little bit of a provocative point, Dan. And I don't know where you'll lie on this, but I think you might agree with me in that. Okay, so if we're going to say we're spending billions of dollars on tests for teachers that don't really align with what it takes to be a good teacher effective, like they're not very predictive, but we're spending billions on them. We are spending probably more money on the way that we create steps and lanes and pay teachers based upon things that have nothing to do with student, achievement, learning, or teacher effectiveness. And that is baked into the financial structure of schools, right? Absolutely. And I don't know, like at the top of my head, I can't say whether or not I think it's more money, but it feels like the number one expense in schools, period, is teacher salaries and pensions and everything, right? And if we align that to things that have nothing to do with how good they are, like the degrees that they get, advanced degrees that they get, time on the job. I don't know what some of the other ones are, but those are the two big ones I can think of: time in the job and education. So if I side with you and I say, okay, we're spending too much money on these tests that don't tell us anything, then should we just make a deal and say, okay, let's apply that to everything?
100%. I mean, look, it's the effect of the traditional steps and lane schedule. By the way, people who say that money doesn't matter, I mean, nobody goes into teaching to get rich, that's for sure. Doesn't mean that you want to live in your parents' basement for the rest of your life. Like, so those incentives you're talking about are enormously effective. In other words, very high percentages of teachers move across those lanes by getting credits and getting degrees. Like, not necessarily to the extent of getting a PhD, but the masters, the BA plus 30, like all these, because this is really the only way that you can make extra money. And it has nothing to do with how your kids are doing. Zero. So the effect of it is, frankly, I mean, there's two things that we should be really concerned about. One is teachers who work generally really hard and have a very stressful job, particularly in their first 5, 6, 7, 8 years of teaching, they're spending time after hours doing coursework so they can make a little extra money that doesn't matter to their ability as a teacher. Why are we putting that extra stress on them and that extra expense on them? And the second thing is, what it means is we are starving early career teachers. I mean, almost literally. I mean, that's no joke. I mean, we've got teacher candidates in our programs who aren't secure in terms of food. So you are making in some parts of the country, as a first, second, third year teacher, you're still making under $40,000.
Which I'd have to say, Dan, that is actually probably a bigger bar on entry. How little it compensates, but how expensive it is to get in is probably a bigger bar on entry for bright and talented college students or people of color than is the testing part. Because I think, honestly, the testing part is really a function of the way that the system is rigged by economics, not by race. Because I think very bright people of color are widely distributed throughout the collegiate pool. They're just not going to go into a teaching school. Number one, if you're first gen or second gen and you are being courted You're bright and you can't pass any test that people put before you. And you're being courted by everything from Facebook and everything else to Accenture and PNC and banking and science and whatever those things. And you can firmly do those things. Why would you choose teaching? Number one, if it's going to cost you money to go into it. And two, after 4 years of debt, you're going to come out and make 35 to 41. How much? You said you have people in your group that are at 40 or 41. Yeah. And there are law firms, for instance, in the Twin Cities that start you out at 180 when you come out, like brand new, fresh with no experience, right?
Right. But part of the reason is, I mean, this is why I raise it, is where we are investing. So if you start to look at the costs of pensions, defined benefit pension plans, if you start to look at the costs of the lanes and the way so steps meaning how you move up by seniority, lanes meaning how you move across and make more money as you get more education credits and degrees. They are weighted very, very heavily towards the more senior end of the pool. So that's a choice we make. We don't have to have compensation that way. We don't have to pay starting teachers $45,000, in some cases $35,000 a year, even in high cost places like New York or Houston, 50,000 maybe. I mean, it is difficult to make a living. It's not a middle class wage. Let me put it that way. It's not that there isn't money in the compensation system. It is that it's tilted very heavily towards the more senior end. And so what would it look like if you started fresh and said, back to your point, Chris, like if you are a high achieving young person of color in school and you've got options all over the place, why are you going to go into teaching with the economics being what they are? What would it look like if you said, hey, we want to figure out how to make starting salaries 70,000, 80,000, and we want to make sure that you have the ability to make $100,000 within 5 or 6 years if you're good.
Let me say this much: if you did that, Dan, we wouldn't be having a discussion about people of color not being able to pass standardized tests.
Yeah, maybe true.
That's the bottom line. Because honestly, I don't think it's a function of the test itself that's keeping people out. I do think we do a disservice to number one, the profession, when we start saying things like, let's find alternative means to the testing because it's keeping weak candidates out, right? We're not saying that really, because in your case, you're saying, yeah, but they're not really weak. Like they possibly could be good at some point or whatnot. But when we talk about professions, that's not the way that the medical profession looks at inducting people. It's definitely not the way that the bar is set up. When you want to be an attorney, like attorneys don't want to lower the bar on the bar, right? People who've already passed the bar don't want to lower the bar on the bar because you know what? That'll lower their hourly billing rate. Exactly. If you start letting a bunch of nincompoops into the system. And in 2 states, at least, I always bring this up because I never knew it was this savage. Illinois and California, it's like under 40%, under 45% for sure, but I believe 40 or lower percent pass rate of the bar on the first time in both of those states. That's savage. And in California, it has to be that way or else everybody would be an attorney. They have too many attorneys, right? So like you have the opposite problem with too many people wanting to become an attorney, and you have the ability to say, yeah, but for those of y'all that don't cut it, and nobody is really saying, yeah, but for people of color are not passing the bar well enough. So why? Because the pay makes it so that people of color who can pass that test are taking it and passing it. And you have black attorneys and brown attorneys and but you wouldn't do that for $30K, a $30K starting price. And oh, by the way, you have to pay for your first year of being, or your first 6 months of being an attorney. You have to pay for it yourself.
That's right. No, that's right. I mean, the economics are off in a major way. So, I mean, it would be a really interesting experiment to change the compensation structure in the way you're talking about. And see what that does to diversity. I still think, by the way, you're going to have to hold ed schools accountable for diversity because we've got too many lily white ed schools. I'm just going to say that. Even in pretty diverse cities and areas. But so I don't think the compensation change would do all the work for you on diversity, but I agree. It would make it a much, much more attractive profession. What you'd have to, what you'd have to be willing to give up is over time, the compensation that goes to senior teachers, so the something like, I'm probably going to get this wrong. You got to ask, Chad Alderman about this, who's great. But it's only something like 15% of the teachers who start teaching who end up getting a max pension.
He has said that, which is crazy.
Crazy. So,
yeah.
I mean, God bless for those 15%. I don't want to take it away from them, but I don't want to keep perpetuating that same system, which is so heavily weighted to the senior end of the scale. Here's
a story by Natalie Wexler about why so many aspiring teachers can't pass a licensing test and why it matters. I'm not going to get to the why it matters part because I think you're here and you're an expert on that part for us. But this to me is amazing. 44% of those who take the Praxis test on elementary level content fail on their first try. Or 54%, I'm sorry. Excuse me. So 54%, the majority, fail on their first try, which to me is amazing. If you look at the scope of the problem, that's huge. That's a lot of people. And I don't know what you just mentioned, we have to hold teacher colleges accountable for some of this. There was a massive paper written years ago. I can't remember. Is it somebody? It's Arthur somebody or other. I don't know if it's Himmelman or something like that, who has spent all his life in teacher education, was an expert, and it wrote a paper about Levine. That's who it was.
Yeah,
that's who it was.
From Teachers College. Yes, I know what you're talking about.
You know the paper I'm talking about, right? Yeah. Like it was a big kind of like,
yes.
He's neither a lover or hater of anything. He's not a partisan in some way. He basically just wrote all the ways in which the system was broken.
Right.
Which to me felt like a document for every reform that you ever needed to make. It was just a document. Here's a blueprint of everything that's broken. So if you want to fix the system, but it feels like we're chipping away at little pieces of it along the way. What's the uniform thing? Do we get you, for instance, and the National Council of what is it?
NCTQ?
NCTQ and TNTP and E for E and TFA and AFT and NEA. What if we get the entire alphabet soup together in one room and say, okay, from end to end, we're going to fix the entire system and not keep chipping away at the pieces of it? First of all, who could call that meeting? And you guys would all come. Obama? Would he, if Obama called it, would you guys all come?
Yes. Yeah. If Obama called it, we would all come. It's and it's been tried. I've been in various rooms like that, and good discussions. But people have different priorities. Let's put it that way.
Well, different politics, probably.
Yes.
But I assume that you are all committed to making a profession that produces high quality candidates.
Yes.
So it seems, at least that's what the mission statements of all these different organizations say. I, for the life of me, can't figure out, though, why there could be known problems and issues that people even of different politics can't figure out how to improve. Like colleges of ed. I had Kathleen Porter McGee on before, and she wrote a piece a while ago with information. Was the first time I'd ever seen it, which was she wrote about, like, if you really want to be Finland, this is what Finland did.
Yeah.
And she kind of walked me through pieces of it that I had never known. Like, they really addressed their colleges of education. So we have American teachers on all sides of the coin who want to say, like, let's look at Finland. Finland respects teachers. They have high respect for teachers. They compensate them well. They treat them like professionals in line with other professionals. And what I saw in Kathleen's piece that I hadn't known before was that they shut down their colleges of ed and reconfigured them.
Yes.
Can we do that in the United States?
Yeah. Well, the problem is more of the states part than the united part in the United States. I mean, so right. I mean, I had to say, not casting aspersions on our wonderful system of federalism, but I get jealous when I talk to education leaders in other countries who are able to do things like on curriculum, like on teacher preparation on a national level. I do think we ought to do that. And look, we're in that game too. We are not blameless. I'm not just talking about university-based programs. I'm talking about alt-route programs like ours. We got to live up to the same standards, and we should. So yes, close all of them, and start fresh with new standards about what it is we are going to prioritize. And what it is we're going to prioritize is the best interest of kids. And we obviously have to come up with a system that works from an economic perspective, and that's going to mean partnerships with government and private sector and districts who are the end employers and schools of ed. But what I would say, Chris, is you've made this point. This is important. You can't fix teacher preparation unless you're fixing the conditions under which teachers operate once they graduate schools of education. And so that's got to be they've got to be at the table too. How are we compensating our teachers? We just talked about that. What are the working conditions for teachers? What are the accountabilities for teachers? So, I think it is time to take a fresh look at all of that. And maybe at least from some states, in the midst of the crisis we're in, there will be political will to really take a deep look at how we're doing things. Because I will tell you, it's a simple thing, but if you applied one question to the policies that we do in how we prepare teachers, how we operate schools. Is this how we would design it if we had the best interests of kids at heart? Would we have steps and lanes? We would not. We would not. Would we use, I would say respectfully, would we use Praxis as basically the exclusive screen for performance for teachers? We would not. We would not do that. As you say,
see, on the first one, I was with you, and then on the second one, I was like, so listen. If we were to design the system over for kids right now, to say that, put it at the center, I agree with you that steps and lanes is probably not the way that we would do it. But almost every other profession, when it comes to something like Praxis or something, is something that we would do. We would have an objective measure that whether or not you said it was going to predict how great of an attorney you were going to be, or how great of a doctor you were going to be, or how great of whatever, you still have to pass it, right? The idea that you can fail chemistry and still be a great doctor, well, that might be all well and fine, that you're going to be a great doctor. Someday you're going to have perfect bedside manner, and you're going to perfectly kind of you're going to be a great doctor, great bedside manner, and you're going to be able to predict what people need and all that stuff. Great, but you just failed chemistry. It's okay.
Right.
It's a little weird. I want to ask you though, because you have a lot of experience in New York, having been in the education department and seen maybe insight on what I'm about to say. But the mediocre teacher has something called a union that actually won't be helped by you saying that the mediocre teacher shouldn't be in the field. Right. So when we talk about the economic incentives within the system, baked into the system, if I'm a union, I don't know that people closing off any avenue for the mediocre teacher to exist within my ranks is good for business. That's why steps and lanes are great for me. We're going to treat everybody the same who's had 5 years and 6 years and 7 years, so we don't have to worry about variance in quality. And every human population has extreme variance in performance, quality, ability, and whatnot. Every profession has that. But if we can just get rid of that variance, the economic model for a union becomes much more powerful. So you're kind of a threat in some ways if you're saying that we still do need to find ways that differentiate teachers' performance, which creates a political firewall for you and me and for others to be able to push on this too much. True or false? True story or not?
True story. Look, here's I don't know, maybe life in education policy would be a lot easier if one teacher was just as good as another in terms of their impact on kids. It's just not the case. As you said, Chris, when you look at the impact of individual teachers on kids, it varies hugely. It varies hugely with kids from the same demographic in the same school. Mr. Jones, the kids are growing by leaps and bounds, whether you want to look at it on a non-cognitive level, whether you want to look at it based on test scores. And Mr. Smith, the kids are going nowhere. That's just the reality. That's the fact, is the big variation. Sure, there's variation between district, there's variation between schools, but the big variation in our school systems in terms of impact on kids is based on the performance of the individual teacher. That hasn't changed. So what do you do when that's the big variable? Treating all fifth-year teachers the same is a really bad policy, and it is problematic. And that is the tension, I think, with the unions, which are based on the collective. And I get it; their obligation is to the collective, and so that's why we get these kind of factory-style policies about how we treat teachers, which are just not helpful. In this case, there might be industries where that works great. As a matter of fact, there are industries where that works fine. It doesn't work well in K-12 education.
It seems like the rub was, years ago, the teachers faced a decision of whether they wanted to be a professional association or a blue-collar-like working class unionism, for like factory unionism. And they chose that one instead of like the professional associations. And, it should be said, teachers weren't for it either, by the way. Many teachers thought that working class unionism would actually ruin the profession. Teachers thought that. Actual professional teachers believed that in the beginning. Al Shanker won them over and then ruined their profession. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. So last week, I had a chance to speak with some national board certified teachers, which I'm a big fan of, and some of the people from within that system and that group. Great conversation. I'm a big fanboy of the whole situation. I posed a question in that group. If every black child and brown child next Wednesday suddenly had all of their teachers replaced in all of their schools with nationally board certified teachers, would it make a material difference within the first year or within the first few months? Or would something change? And it's an absurd conclusion. It's not going to happen. I mean, it's an absurd premise, but it's not going to happen. But I just want, as a thought exercise, if the answer is yes, then it can tell us a lot of things that would be useful to us. So, I pose you the same question. Let's forget about the praxis. Let's forget about these other things. But if literally every black child and brown child in the United States suddenly got a nationally board certified teacher, which is an additional and enhanced, I think, a training of a teacher, do you think it would make a material difference in ways that could guide how we start thinking about policy then?
Yes, it would make a material difference. No question. National board certified teachers have gone through a really rigorous process to get that certification that most teachers don't go through. And in general, I think are higher performers. And so would it make a difference for black and brown kids? Yeah, I think they'd learn more if you could wave that magic wand. Could we learn something from policy for policy? Sure. You quickly get into a lot of issues of can you scale it and how do you pay for it and all these things. But to me, Chris, it goes back to the main point, which is individual teachers perform at different levels and have impacts on kids that are quite different or profoundly different. And so, who they are, certainly what training they've received and, their level of talent and their level of commitment, all that stuff matters. Ultimately, what you've got to do, even if you could wave that magic wand, here would be my friendly amendment. I'd still want to know how the kids were doing in each of those teachers' classrooms.
But what would you predict how they would be doing?
better.
Knowing what you know about them, you would predict they'd do better.
Yeah.
And so I think it goes back to your other initial point, though, because being a nationally board certified teacher isn't based just upon a standardized test.
Correct.
Like it's when you said rigorous, it's rigorous, but it's not based upon you performing well on Praxis. It's got some other stuff involved,
Right.
In the process. And I'm just wondering if that was baked in at the front end. Like if more colleges of ed were doing something along the lines of what, that program does, we might be better off. You just mentioned what would be an obstacle, the cost.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that could be offset by what we already spend?
Yeah.
I mean, we already spend
absolutely.
a lot of money, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I also think your point about doing it at the front end would be a great thing. So if you had real rigor, not just seat time and kind of tuition, but real rigor and around clinical practice. By the way, I'm not saying coursework has no place in teacher preparation. Coursework does have a place, but it shouldn't be the primary driver. But if there were real rigor, like you couldn't get your diploma, you couldn't get your certification unless your classroom practice was really top notch. And the main way we measure whether your classroom practice is top notch is not just by videotaping you and seeing what kind of nice moves you make, but how are the kids doing?
Mm-hmm.
How are the children doing?
Mm-hmm.
That would be a huge change. It would be a totally different economic model. That's not what ed programs are selling right now. Go down in Texas and you'll see on billboards, it's like, hey, just pay a couple of $1,000 and you become a teacher. That's what's being sold right now, as opposed to
that way. Yeah.
As opposed to, the elite. Like this is the elite. This is the Navy SEALs. You want to be a teacher out of this program, it's going to mean something because you passed a very significant hurdle and test that shows that kids who are taught by you do very, very well. That's where we need to get to.
So I feel like where you and I might be able to land in the exact same place is, okay, let's say that I give on this, the Praxis and testing isn't the only measure,
right? Which
is very hard, Dan, for me to give on. Just because I have children in the system. I have kids in the system. Right. I would just prefer a teacher that looks at that and says, I can ace that. That's not a problem. Right. In my classroom, like, I don't, for your kids and for everybody else, like, to each his own, do what you want to do. But when it came to me, if I had an option to pick what teachers I want for my kids, I want the ones who look at that thing and go, that's actually like easier than all the other tests I've taken, right? And just pass it and go in. Whether or not it predicts anything, like it can predict nothing. All things being equal, even if it predicted nothing, I still would prefer the teacher that looks at it like child's play and just passes it, right? But if you and I have to have some sort of agreement on things, this is where I think I would land too, is like that nationally certified board thing to me is a thing. It's rigorous and it makes me feel better to know, that my teacher is nationally board certified. So if we could just pump up the steroids in the teacher colleges to the front end and say somebody came out of that and they still didn't pass Praxis, I just would feel so much better. There would be video of them. There would be real world residency. There would be kind of like, feedback. I would feel so much better.
Right. Yeah, we got a lot of common ground on that, Chris, because here's the thing, like what troubles me, just to be clear, is the states that are saying, it troubles me on a bunch of levels, is to say, Praxis is a bar, particularly for candidates of color. Let's get rid of it, period. And then you as a parent, Chris, you're like, well, what quality assurance do I have? I'm putting my kids in a classroom with this person. Did they have to show anything? That's not what we're talking about. That's troubling. But to say, Praxis is a very, very blunt tool. Let's see if we can find a sharper tool. And very clearly, again, like this is more like the few, the proud, the Marines, like, no, we want to be able to show if you are a certified teacher in our district, you came through some fire to get there. And sure, national board certification is an example of a really rigorous program. You got to work really hard and you got to pass a high bar. That's what we should have. We should be able to look every parent and every student in the eye and say, hey, if we're putting a teacher in the classroom, we are asking you to put your babies in, with this person all day, every day. we have very high standards on quality, for sure.
What if you said, if you fail to practice, especially since we want more teachers of color in, if you fail it, the state will guarantee to pay for your national board certification, the process, because it does cost money. It does cost you money. So if you still want to still want to participate, we're not going to X you out because you failed to practice, but we are going to give you enhanced. We're going to finance your enhanced training.
So this is, I mean, we could do something like that now because lots of states, I mean, people can't take the Praxis. I mean, there's an at-home Praxis thing, but people can't take it right now. So it's an interesting point. So instead of just saying, all right, we're going to delay that, take it when everything goes back to normal, if it goes back to normal, what if we said, all right, we're going to put you through something different now that Praxis isn't happening. And we're going to get some gold-plated researchers to come in and look at the thing we put together, which might look something like national board certification, might look something like the screen, the quality screen that we have at TNTP, or some combination. We're going to see whether it's a better predictor than Praxis, or maybe Praxis and this is a better predictor. Not to necessarily say we get rid of Praxis, but maybe what we say is, I think, Chris, where you're going, there's two ways you can get there. Both are a real screen. You could pass certification exams and do the coursework, et cetera, or you could do this other method, which research shows predicts quality as well or better. Back to the law profession, I love how, as the old lawyer, I love how you keep talking about the bar and stuff. There used to be a way, by the way, to become a practicing lawyer admitted to the bar without taking a bar exam. You used to be able to apprentice. This is how Abe Lincoln got his, he didn't go to Harvard, right? And but he apprenticed. And so we don't do that anymore in the law profession.
No, but you can still become an attorney without going to law school.
Yes. You still got to pass that bar exam.
You have to pass the bar, and there are people that do it. But they do it by the way that you just said. Some of them become apprentices, or they help in law firms for a while, and then they take the bar and they pass, and they don't have to go to law school. They're not in debt for the law school part. So as we get closer to the end here, I do think that that's common ground in that, like, the Praxis doesn't have to be the end all be all, but if you don't pass it, there should be some sort of financially supported way for you to keep growing and continue to enter the field with a lot of support and a lot of help. And I think actually, even you just made a great point. It doesn't have to be nationally board certified training is the thing that I keep saying this because it's one of the things I've latched on to, right? But there are other methods. Maybe it's a portfolio of things. You didn't pass the Praxis. This isn't the end of the road for you. And as a matter of fact, we see such value in you still coming in the field that we're going to finance the portfolio of other options that you have here, right? So maybe it's a TNTP thing, maybe it's a relay thing, maybe it's a TFA thing, maybe it's the national certification, maybe it's a portfolio of things, and you get to choose. But they're all going to be high quality, evidence tested and high quality, and it's going to give the public some assurance that even though you didn't pass the Praxis, you still belong here. We can help you.
That's right.
I like that. I do want to say this, and this is a provocative thing to bring up at the very end here, but, in Minnesota, when we looked at this, and you know a lot about Minnesota, you guys have been here for a while. We looked at this in Minnesota, we were thinking about getting rid of the basic skills test, and we weren't really thinking about it. We were making it happen. And I shouldn't say we, but political forces were making that happen. And, kind of the thought was it's keeping people of color out of the profession. But when we looked at it, all of the people of color who were being brought by TFA actually had 100% pass rate. So TFA recruits who actually were trying to get into the classrooms, which was a significant portion of people trying to get in the classroom here. So somehow they were able to recruit people of color who could pass the test 100%, no problem, which kind of colors the shade for me of this conversation we're having right now. Is it's not about people of color not being able to pass. It's about whether or not you've recruited people of color who can pass. or whether you're just trying to have a big wide open funnel of anybody can come and play. Everybody gets a trophy. So, all right, Dan. Well, I feel like we have solved all the world's problems in teaching. And anybody who's listening to this can just take what we said here, run with it. And by this time next year, we will have no problems in the classroom whatsoever.
Exactly. We got that magic wand. We got that magic wand.
Everybody's looking for a silver bullet. I think we just provided it. It was very tiring, but we did it. We made it happen. Final words from you, just around if someone has watched this and they have felt like the point of all that we're saying is that the praxis shouldn't be the only way or the only determining way for us to figure out whether or not somebody should be teaching kids or not. But we didn't really touch on this last part, which I would love for you to end on, is everything that we just talked about is aggravated by COVID and the uncertainty that we're facing for the next year, next 2 years or whatnot. Where would you put your policy emphasis? You had 3 things in your blog post, but where would you put the policy emphasis to account for the fact that we're facing a really different time now and will be for the next couple of years?
Yeah, I would put it on finding performance measures that you can scale that will work when you're teaching remotely. It isn't like we're not going to have any contact with kids. We just might not be we're not going to have as much contact in person with kids, but we're still going to have lots of instruction going on. Find some performance measures that you think set a good bar that will be predictive of future performance for teachers and future impact on kids. And test it, no pun intended. See whether it's as good a predictor as what you've been using before. Because I'm very confident you can probably find something that's a better predictor than what we've got now. And here's the ultimate thing: like we have a teaching workforce across the country because 3.5 million people, give or take. That's a lot. That's more than lawyers, than doctors, than accountants, than architects. So we need to be drawing from a really broad pool of talent, and then we need to have really effective ways of figuring out who's doing it well and who isn't. Right now, we're not drawing from a really broad pool of talent. There's a whole bunch of people we talked about over the last hour who aren't even thinking about going into teaching, and that's in part because of economics. It's in part because it isn't known as a profession you have to pass a rigorous bar to get through. So let's start coming up with some really rigorous bars that are productive, that don't artificially keep out talent that we will be able to use. And let's use this time when things are all messed up to measure the performance of teachers and figure out ways we can have a really high bar, but a really predictive bar.
I think it's a great place to stop. Dan, thank you so much for coming on today. I have tons and tons and tons of respect for you and for your expertise, your insights, and your level-headed way of having all these discussions, because I don't know how you do it, because if I were you right now, I'd be a sniper by now. With all the political experience that you've had, I'd be up on a tower screaming down to people on the news if I were you by now.
There are days, my friend.
I can't even see it with you. Actually, I can't even see like that part of you existing. But I will say this much: what I called out earlier, I think as a layperson, a civilian, a parent, a taxpayer, an American citizen, somebody who looks at these things and expects smart people to get their shit together. When I say that I think TNTP and the NEA and AFT and TFA and E for E and keep going down the alphabet soup, this is your problem collectively to fix if you want an American population that respects teachers. Stop demanding that we respect your teachers and your so-called profession, which is right now in my mind a vocation. It will be a profession when all of you people sit at a table together and take collective responsibility for the quality of the entire pipeline from end to end, that even nonpartisan people and people within the system know is the issue. How we recruit, how we find teachers, how we recruit them, how we prepare them and educate them, and then place them and support them and re-educate them throughout time and help them with peer systems that help them be better year over year, and how we invite them to be successful elsewhere when they don't cut it. all of those things from end to end to end is the responsibility, the collective responsibility for people demanding that we show respect for the profession. As a taxpayer, parent, citizen, I would love to show you that respect. I would love you to respect it enough as a collective to take responsibility for it and fix it.
Yeah, well said. And if we just 30 more seconds, well said. People talk a lot about elevating the teaching profession, That's like a buzz phrase you hear all the time. Usually what they're talking about is increasing pay, which, I'm behind, and making it less rigorous to become a teacher and stay a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And that is exactly the wrong direction. It's exactly the wrong direction. Simply lionizing all teachers because they do a tough job and an important job, which is absolutely true, is not going to elevate the profession. What's going to elevate the profession is exactly what you say, showing that in order to become a teacher and stay a teacher, you have to show that you are having a positive impact on kids all the time.
Mm.
That's what will gain us the respect. That's, by the way, what will gain us more tax dollars flowing, if that's what's needed into certain communities, and the prestige that teachers really deserve, but the way we've got things structured right now, they're not getting, because it's assumed that pretty much anybody can become a teacher and stay a teacher, and that's not wrong based on the policies we've set up. We got to change that equation.
I love it. Great place to stop. Dan, will you come back if you have another big report that comes out, or if you guys have another piece that helps us give the regular public, civilians, insight into good policy?
Love it. Anytime, Chris. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you and everybody who's listening, watching. Great comments I saw today. I will go back and read all of them. Most of you had very smart things to say about whether or not passing the test is important for teachers, what might be getting in some of their ways. One of you even gave Dan a very big shout out, Michelle Johnson. TNTP training courses are more rigorous than many college classes. So thank you guys for watching, listening, participating, adding to the discussion, and helping mere mortals and civilians understand better education policy. I love it. It's one of my favorite things that I do all week long. So have a great day, everyone. And please do all that you can to support better education for every child in America.